Speaking, I think our students default in their heads to being defined by practice. I will do what practice gives me. And so having a firm, having someone like Susan who has come in and taken a kind of ethical stance and had it drive her practice is, I think, an extraordinary kind of role model for young architects to see. So with no further ado, I will only say that this is part of a 2-lecture series. So the Softwood Lumber Board was hoping to send us an exhibition this year. Didn't work for technical reasons, but instead they very generously agreed to donate and fund a kind of micro lecture series, so of whom Susan is the first, and Alan Organsky is going to be speaking later in the semester as well about wood and architecture. So with no further ado, if we could please, online and in person, welcome Susan. I'm so glad you're here.
I think I get to take this off, which is really great. Thank you so much, David. That was really a sweet introduction, and I really appreciate the thoughtfulness about that because it fits so many of the themes of this lecture. But first of all, I have to tell you how much I love your city. This is my first time in Austin. We have spent, my husband and I flew out from Seattle as vitamin D escapees. We needed your sun, and you provided. You all gave me all this warning about temperature and ice and this and that, and I couldn't be happier. Have spent the last 2 days in the sun. An amazing experience. We spent 2 days on rental bicycles. We went all the way up and down your river. Lucia, Athens, you rock with that pedestrian bicycle infrastructure plan. It's an incredible way to experience your city. We saw places that I don't know if anybody in this room have seen. Way down East Austin, through these copses of walnut and oak trees next to this beautiful river there. It was just stunning. It was really fabulous. We did go out and visit Plenty Fisk. I will let you know. We spent a good hour getting out to his place. He welcomed us in Plenty style, and we rode back very safely along the busy road, and then we got back onto the beautiful river pieces. There's this kinship between Seattle and Austin, and I felt like I've been behind in my cultural awareness, but not to have been to Austin before this. But we welcomed Lucia to our town after you graduated her here with her master's in science from architecture many years ago. And she took over Green Building after taking over here, where she helped start Green Build, the first Green Build in Austin, and I believe it was 97. And then Oregon hosted the next one in 1999, which was my first one. Right in the middle of that, LEED is helping and coming alive and coming forth. So a great kinship between the two cities, and other friends and whatnot, Jason McClendon back and forth, and Marnie Evans-Kahn, really dear friends who have been real compatriots in this whole piece. So thank you, Austin, for supporting us all in this world. I want to just introduce a little bit about my firm. We are a small firm. We have about 6 people. We are generally a regional firm, known as a small regional firm in Washington State, with downtown offices in Seattle. We work around the Pacific Northwest. I am licensed in multiple states. We're doing some projects in Oregon right now. But the region itself defines us. And the lakes in the center, the islands in the lakes in the center, the bay on the left, and the islands outside this picture to the west, and the mountains to the east, all crisscrossed with massive bridges with the tech community of Bellevue and Microsoft and Amazon and Facebook, et cetera, in between, is a massive King County region that really has defined us by landscape. Most of our projects are in this region, and most of my life was spent in forests, growing up as a 3rd-generation Northwesterner in forests like this, protected by national parks, federal national parks. This is what we would call an old growth forest. It's a forest that shall never be cut again, should never be cut again, but the tension between the trees on the right, which are merchantable logs, merchantable timber at 16-foot lengths times 4 at 40 feet, gives you the merchantable lengths of a Douglas fir. And the tension between these two poles of both what is for sale and what is for never for sale and only for its biological, ecological experiences has been an endemic part of my life growing up. We saw the Pacific Northwest timber wars in the 1990s, where the entire lumber industry shut down, and it was something that affected people in our lives on a daily basis. The notion of waste, the notion of ecology, has been a very strong part of my work as a national leader in mass timber. And it was one of the elements that propelled me forward to take this path of down the world of mass timber. This is one of my favorite slides because it shows the triple laminate of a 3-ply CLT piece. The pieces on the top and the bottom are going horizontal. The pieces in the middle is going perpendicular to the slide. It's cast slightly blue because that tree has been killed by a blue beetle, and the fungus that is created on that piece there is what caused the death of that tree. You can also see the curve of the tree, the rounded edges of the tree on both sides of that piece. So you know that this is not a strong piece of timber. It's a piece that is a binder between these two stronger pieces on the top and the bottom. And those spaces in there, which are really not much bigger than the size of my thumb, are elements that create, are the reason you can use this piece of waste pieces because of the laminate, the glue in between. Using this waste timber, which is a mentality which is entirely different from our heavy timber that we've been used to seeing in timber structures, was the basis of my understanding of what the value of mass timber was. It's a 21st century technology that's highly crafted. This all came together in my brain about 10 years ago when we started designing our house. This is my personal house. My family lives here now. I raised my 2 teenagers in here. They're now college students. We've lived there for 6 years as of just a few months ago. For those of you who may know Greek, like my husband, okos plus logi is the formative nature of ecology. Ecology is the study of one's house. The study of one's house, the study of one's world, the study of one's earth, the study of one's forest. In this case, the study of one family. It all came together in one element in this house. And the notions of ecology have been very deep. Our lives were changed because of building this house, and my practice was changed irrevocably because of the journey and the path that I took down to build this house for our family. The disruption that has developed from the mass timber industry has been felt on multiple levels. In the architectural industry, engineering industry, construction industry, the regulatory issue with the policies, and also within the forest dialogues. The disruption is real and palpable, and there's tremendous turmoil going on. It's one of the first materials that have been brought to the new market, much like reinforced concrete in the early days of Corbu and steel in the early days of Mies and Otto Wagner before him. There's a significant sense of disruption. But this disruption that I am experiencing, that all of us who are involved in mass timber today, was a very slow path, and it did not happen overnight. And the first decade of my practice, which, believe me, I won't go through every project, but the first decade was about a disruption of efforts to make this disruption, to bring proportion, light, space, materiality, and detail to this torrent of relearning that the entire industry was going through when sustainability, thank you to Lucia and so many others, came and hit our profession full on in the late 1990s. We had to relearn so many of the pathways and thoughts about how we did architecture. We were asked to relearn them. We went from gadgets and gizmos to systemic thinking, thank you Pliny Fisk and so many others. The systemic thinking was a critical issue to bring us into ideas of waste and food, waste sites, waste roofs, waste facades, waste water, waste carbon, waste wood, waste carbon, waste carbon, waste carbon. And from then, at the very end, the Carbon Ecologies 2.0 is where I will end. This is a short little outline for the lecture, but I want to bring in because it was a very slow path. These first few projects are all about waste to energy regarding food. The biodiesel shed. Biodiesel was a big thing in Seattle in the early 2000s. We all had these little biodiesel shells, and we were running around converting our Mercedes, old Mercedes, tiny Mercedes, into biodiesel sheds and putting them in the backyards of people. And there was no design. These little things were humble people, humble structures by trying to do work in them. And one of the things that was very clear to me was how to bring design to this message that was a very powerful, very ethical message. We started off understanding what biodiesel filtration really meant and how you did create diesel for a car out of French fry oil, used French fry oil. We had collectives collecting French fry oil all over the city, and we had to go through this filter and upcycling piece. We researched about what this was all like. We figured out this beautiful little spot in the back of a lovely pool hall off of an alley that could be this little housing. We wanted to make it a demonstratable element that would be educating to people. We found these tubes. We thought about the tubes. We thought about them as a filter. We made dozens and dozens of little models like the one in the middle to capture this piece. We finally came upon a material that was made out of, guess what, waste. Wasted milk jugs, used to filter, upcycle, unbait, and making into these beautiful translucent sheets, which we then cut down to a CNC model and mold into recycled plastic fins and assembled them into, yes, a model, a quarter-scale high model of these pieces that would glow, lovely photographs, lovely photo montages, and we pitched it to the owner of the garage, who was right next door, who was a fantastically successful pool hall and so made wonderful hamburgers. Thousands of kids there per weekend. We thought this is a great way to tell this message. And he said, well, who's going to pay for it? I said, well, I don't know. Well, we're the architect. You're the client. Oh, well, how much do you think it costs? Well, I think about $15,000. Oh, well, that's a lot of money. I got to sell more hamburgers. I sell hamburgers. I sell pool. I don't make these things. He said, well, if you want to buy it, if you want to sell it, if you want to build it, you go ahead and pay for it. Oh, design, clients, economics. So many of these journeys are about this piece. So while we won a big, nice award for that project, we did not get it built. The next project, though, we did get from that project, and it was the Biodiesel Station, only it was funded by now Global Capital. We thought we had it made. Great. So we built this very elegant little element. We rebrand the whole Biodiesel Station for Propel. This is July of 2007. We get this wonderful kit of parts. We have these biodiesel stations in the Pacific Northwest where we have water to deal with, and we have biodiesel stations in places like Austin and Sacramento and Southern California that have solar to deal with. We're still collecting the water. We've got all the pieces, and yes, a few of them got built. One of them got built in South Lake Union. We're creating the little landscape of the sunflowers because that's where the oil came from. That's where it's been upgraded with a little water filter in there. Lovely little water louver mock-up. Fabulous little piece. It's now destroyed because of Global Capital as well, because South Lake Union is all taken up. But our plan was to roll these out and some kind of royalty system with down through Sacramento, all the way up and down the coast of California, Oregon, and Washington. Again, the royalties got shifted. We didn't sign our contracts correctly. They went down to Sacramento, and another architect took them over, changed the whole branding concept, and we built this one. We were very happy about it, and yes, we won another award for it, but it stayed as a one-off, as a single prototype that didn't have the power or the impact that we thought. And then biodiesel's profile changed in the sustainability environmental movement anyway, and we were kind of happy we hadn't built 200 of them in the end. The third waste to energy project, though, we said, let's take this into our own hands. So my husband and I, who's not an architect, bought this piece of land as an auction item from WashDOT, from the Washington Department of Transportation. They were building this huge, lovely tunnel over to the tech companies on the east side of Seattle. And this little tiny site, 3,000 square feet, just a leftover thing, a pittance, and we were waiting to work on it. So first we thought, well, let's do something with food in the right-of-way. There's a Thurgood Marshall Elementary School right across the street that has dozens and dozens of hundreds and hundreds of elementary school kids, one of the biggest free lunch zones, elementary schools in the city. My daughter was going there. Let's make these into these little greenhouses for people. So the first thing for the kids. So the first thing is my neighbors. We get this whole group out there. We're doing a cooperative here. We're tilling the land. We've enrolled our lovely kids who were this age when we were doing this back in 2007. We hit up to asphalt. Right below my daughter's foot, 6 inches below, is asphalt. So we said, hey, we can't put these greenhouses on there, so we have to build something that's above ground. So we built this little tiny, super low cost, $500 now, not $15,000, $500 per piece, all found little tiny water sheds and soil bags and a little bit of a solar operated temperature feeling and pump for the water to come in. And we had this great plan. We pitched it to the school. We pitched it to a Kickstarter site, and we raised $990. And 500 of that was from my mother, which was very nice of her. But the plan stayed as an idea, and the plan won a nice, again, design award, but it stayed on the shelf. and the land still stayed the way it was. The next zone, though, we went to Starbucks. Starbucks came to us. We don't quite know how. They said, listen, we've got this parking garage. This is the roof of the parking garage, and it's right under Howard Schultz's office. That's the city of Seattle in the background, looks over the water. It's an acre. It's an entire acre. It's been sitting there. It's a wasted site, 43,000 square feet. Let's build something here that can be fabulous for people who work for Howard. So we went to the Office of Sustainability and Environment. We said, hey, listen, we've got this, you're looking for a green roof initiative, a demonstration site. Boy, do we have a demonstration site run by Starbucks, headquarters run by, on the top of this reef. It's an acre. We can hold stormwater, capture that stormwater, reduce the water runoff, which we have great issues with in Seattle, and then create a green roof for people to use. We talked to the city of Seattle. We got all the assembly issues, the code issues massively done, put together this lovely presentation of how the water would be, the green would be held up at the top, the water would be held in a cistern, come off as a runoff down to a decorative cistern down at the green street down below, and the mermaid would be surrounded by green up on the top of this roof. Lovely pastel drawings. We were going to have Howard out there. He had his speaking spot. We were going to have solar, potentially a building up there, a lot of wind to have this all be powered, and places for people, for the 3,000 employees at Starbucks headquarters who were working at the building at the time, from waste to energy, looking out over the bay. Built these beautiful models, and then guess what? We got it priced. This scheme was $6.5 million. Seems like a pretty good deal if you're Howard Schultz. Not. The next scheme down, with just less of the solar, less of the wind, less of the paved structure, was $4.5 million. If we just wanted to do sedums over the entire roof, it was going to be $1.5 million. Howard said no, to all three of them. He had his investors in New York. He was concerned about them. They didn't want having some frivolous Seattle thing, a green roof on top of a parking garage. Didn't look good for the New York investors. So that project went into the drawer as well. The next project we looked at was a series of greenhouses for a friend of mine who had been a great partner from Daniel's development, Kevin Daniels, a very good friend of mine. And he was building these high-rises on a parking lot, a wasted site, across from the Seahawks Stadium, which was a fabulous project for the entire city. And he had been granted an agreement with the city of Seattle to build these high-rises plus the block next door to it. And he had this little tiny space on top of the podium, on top of the parking garage, that was ready and waiting for green. So we came to him and said, listen, you want to put in a restaurant, a high-end organics restaurant down on the lower floor. We want to put in some greenhouses to grow that food on top of that. Of course, we had to worry about the sun shading for all of the high-rises. It was facing south. It was well positioned there. And we worked with landscape architects, worked with planters, planting people to come up with a planting plan that would work for agricultural food on top of this parking garage for different seasons, in the winter, in the summer, in the fall, all through the menus for the restaurant all year. Little tiny details regarding the beauty of these spaces, capturing the water, capturing the light, heating it with the light source on the interior, growing the food, and then detailing it all out, and again, getting it priced out. And guess what? You already know the answer. Kevin said no, cost too much, can't do it. Then he said, but no problem, because I've got this wall that I have to do, and I've been given money, I've been given $1 million by the county to develop this wall, this vertical wall this time, on the same side of this site. Awesome, Kevin, can't wait. So this time I taught a studio at the University of Washington on greenhouses, on hydroponic greenhouses. This is in 2010. We learned all about all the different elements of the hydroponic trays and the ebb and flow system, this lovely system called the verticrop, which is like a dry cleaning rack, which goes, you can move all of the plants around, and they get equal access to light, and they're using much less nutrients, much less water. And the beauty of it was that all of these systems could go on the outside of the garage, screen the garage from the site, from the Seahawks fans who were getting out of their game every day, and coming out and moving up and down. You could use the maintenance as it was going up and down, and it created a very simple, lovely diagram on the exterior. of this parking garage? Well, I don't have to tell you the answer to this one, but the answer was not only about cost. It was also about maintenance, because you had to have somebody to manage this thing. And it got more and more complex. These new systems that we were devising were pushing the boundaries of code. They were pushing the boundaries of, yes, risk for costs for our developers and for our owners, but they were also pushing the boundaries of operations and management. And we were pushing more and more of these areas that made it almost impossible to build one of these few things. We tried one more time, entering a competition for Jason McLennan on the Living Future to capture all of these ideas in one of our big notions here was to green all of Pioneer Square, where that lovely, the lovely hydroponic greenhouses would have been, to add stormwater retention areas, to clean up the waterfront, to take down the highways, to capture the water in the underground areas under Pioneer Square, to clean it, to use it as energy through microturbines, put green roofs, etc. In 2011, and we won, yes, another lovely award. A lovely design award. It was around this time, though, that we were beginning to reconsider our strategy. That as architects, offering up design, because we were offering it up out of our passion, also being paid for all of those projects, almost all of them anyway, offering up that level of passion was probably a strategy that was not going to be sustaining in the long run. And there was, at the same time, 140 acres that was coming into my family management from my grandfather, who had bought it in the 1960s. It had been clear cut, and he'd been growing these trees. And there was a sense of discernment that the deeper I go into my own personal resources and use those resources for what they are, whatever those may be, and it's not just financial, it's a collection of family memories, history, legacy that all of us have, every single person in this room has. The deeper you go into that and use those resources, the more powerful that can become. That level of discernment was a long process, and it didn't happen overnight, and I wouldn't even have been able to say that it was happening until now when I look back 10 years. But when we looked at those trees that heretofore I'd been very proud of, that my grandfather had bought this forest on top of the mountain, it wasn't worth a lot, but it was a beautiful idea to be on the top of an island in the mountains. And yet the forest looked like this. When I really looked at that forest was not healthy, that forest was not a gift, that forest had been neglected and wasted and unmanaged by my family for 60 years. And knowing that and understanding the shame and the challenge and the excitement that by using one's own personal efforts and energies to begin to regenerate that wasted forest was the beginning of a very different thought process for my practice. We planted new trees. We thinned trees along the way. And we had the opportunity to build a house. And they were very disconnected at first, and they grew very connected in the beginning. This is me digging deep. It's post-recession. It's 2011 and 12. I'm wondering if I should have this firm or not, because I can't seem to get anything really decent built. And we're building these little house models. We built a lot of them. And we have the opportunity to buy a tiny site that's completely wasted in this triangular site in the middle of Madison Park. It's a leftover site. You can see it there. The diagonality of Madison comes down. It's kind of our Broadway of Seattle. And it's this leftover little triangular site, about 2,000 square feet. The site itself, and we said we can build, my kids have been in this 1,000 square foot condo for 10 years, and they were getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and we had no room for them. So we decided to build a house, and we were lucky enough and privileged enough to be able to do that. But the kind of house that it was going to be at this point was very different than the kind of house I would have built 2 or 3 years before this point. Because at this point, I knew I wanted it to be a demonstration house. I knew I had to put the resources together, both professional, personal, and financial. I had to begin to take a huge risk and make a statement with design, and to do something that had not been done. Because all of the other projects that I'd been trying to do had also not been done, but everybody was too scared to do them, except for somehow me. Now, mass timber is not new. Uli's looking at me like, Susan, this is not new, of course. Germany, Austria, it's been around for 30 years. So in a way, I felt like I had a free pass, right? Because the technology was tried and true. It just wasn't done in America. There were about 2 buildings in Canada, and both of them designed by Michael Green at that time. And that was about it. As far as I know, there were maybe 2 houses, 3 houses in New York that nobody could see because they were very private. There were NDAs associated with them. I didn't even know about them at the time. And there was one house that I knew had been built with mass timber that was built by, I think, the Tennessee State football coach. And it looked like an Italian Renaissance villa. All the mass timber was completely closed up. So doing this research, and there was a little cabin that had been built near the border of Canada. Doing this research was astonishing because it made me realize this could be something that could be a true demonstration house, and a really exciting one at that. And so that began the journey of this house. It's a little bit of a story about the site, the little cantilever pulled out from underneath the triangular, carving out the slip slide with the courtyard in the middle of it to reflect the geometries of the site. It was a pure triangle. It's a terrible design project to go through. But no architect wants to deal with 45-degree angles, believe me, and neither did I. But again, it was a leftover site. We made the most of it. These are the models that I did, I think, from 2011 to 2014. We ended up with one up at the top. I had to cut a whole floor off so I could afford the whole thing. And we ended up with this one with a roof deck, but only 2 floors, 1,500 square feet, a little basement down, sub-basement, which we put the TV down there, the little courtyard, and a cantilever. The diagram for the house is this. We have a black shell of shaoshuriban, the Japanese burned wood, which we got pre-finished from Montana. Douglas fir, 1x4s. The blackness surrounds as a hard shell, the softness of the interior of the mass timber inside. You only see it a little bit at that one cutout there where that courtyard happens, and it's kind of bearing its breast to open the beauty of the wood up there. And we had a lot of fun with the Cnc modeling, as you can see there. There's a core that's in the center of the house that carries almost all of the services, the basement, the HRVs, the ERVs, the heating, and the kitchen and the bathroom above, and as a vertical shaft with the staircase around it, and there's a roof deck on top, which is a simple standing seam, very vernacular for the area. This is from the alley. This part of so much of the siting of this house is based on the fact that there's a very thorough, robust and dirty and active alley with garbage trucks going up and down, and delivery trucks, semis coming through, and parking lots across the street. And we both wanted to wall that off, as well as open up to the light, because it's also the south and the west. So we kept the horizontal views very screened, and then we added a fence down here at the bottom to screen in this little courtyard. On the inside is the pure blonde wood of the spruce, the pine, and the fir that are brought down from Canada. At the time, there was only one manufacturer of mass timber in the entire, I should say COT, in the entire West Coast, one west of the Mississippi, and it was up in Canada, Structure Lamb. Nordic Lamb was on the east side, up in northern Quebec, but there were 2 manufacturers in all of North America. And we convinced Structure Lamb to give us a price for this that we could afford. And 67 panels arrived on site in a dark day in December, which was not at all like your dark day in January last week. Inside the diagonality of the house, the views are slicing through diagonally through the spaces from the courtyard to the living room, to the outside, the black, the dark, and the blonde, outside and inside. The little courtyard is growing in, added by a fence. There's a huge fig tree that creates shade and respite from the alley. And inside the CLT is exposed. We did what we would call a hybrid system. The glulam beams get a little heavy for me, so we are using, in most cases, as often as we can, afford it, a very light painted steel. At the top is a beam and a couple of 4x4 steel columns, all white enameled. The house steps down, sort of looking at Villa Müller from Los, the space coming down the staircase into the main living area to reflect the sectionality of the site. As you move up and around the staircase, the core You expose the 3-ply, the 5-ply for the floor and ceiling slabs. The light is coming down from above Skylight, a rooftop Skylight. And in my daughter's room, we had fun with the cutouts that you saw from the exterior, where we were riffing off a little bit of the way pine knots look in the cedar, in pine when they're weathered, and this mysterious shape and quality of the grain as it weathers over time. We had a lot of fun with the sections because we were able to do, I'll use my mouse now, 1 panel, 2 panels, a 3rd one behind this one, and a 4th one where this wall was, where this window is, all sitting on a little steel angle. We were able to put that space up in about 4 hours, as opposed to what would typically cause a contractor and a carpenter extreme anxiety. And everything fit perfectly, thanks to the CNC machines. Walking up the stairs again, through the open window here, up to the roof deck, and the house from the outside again. What we didn't really understand was the whole prefabricated nature of the CLT. We did all the shop drawings ourselves. We had this artistic diagram, an architect's diagram of what we thought the panels would look like. 16 panels. Oh, get your 67 pieces out. Cut from those. We're only having a little bit of the black waste in here. In fact, what happened was a much more sophisticated project that was run by CADWorks and was run out of Structural Lab's shop. They did a fabulous job for us. This beautiful drawing, I find it beautiful, is not done by us. It was done by Thor DeVoe, who is the CADWorks operator. It arrives on my computer one day. Those are 857 connectors that are needed for this house, and there's 15 different kinds of connectors represented there. And he thought it kind of looked cool, and I always love this drawing. Inside, the wood was very bare. We sealed it. But one of the most amazing things was that you could count this wood. You could count the panels, you could quantify it, you could add data to it. You knew how many 3-ply panels there were and how many board feet there were. You knew how many 5-ply panels and how many board feet there were. And you knew the total board foot, which then allowed you, through some complicated formulas that only really foresters and lumber people know, to figure out how many trees there were and how many acres it took to grow the trees to build this house, to build these 67 panels. That quantification became very important when we're thinking about the carbon and the LCAs that we're working on. But mostly inside this house, the wood was a constant and beautiful reminder of, yes, both the prefabrication quality of these finger joining that joined those elements together, and also the way the light, and in this case, the reflected water shone upon it, the reminder of the power of the CNC machine and the ease at doing this little art project on the outside of my daughter's walls, and the glory of being able to work with angles that didn't really cause any issues. We had an opportunity to do one more project in this Mass Timber 1.0. It was also a waste-to-energy project. It was in 2015 and 14 we received this project, and we were asked to make a space of awe out of this 1970s office building, which wasn't even concrete. It was actually just stucco over steel. And it was a really difficult building from 1974 to make a space for a church out of. The church wanted to move from Northeast 8th, which is here, from their old church over to here. They were doing some kind of real estate play with some Chinese developers that were going to build 3 high-rises on their site, and they had the money to buy this building and build their church. So they hired us to build an $8 million church on the outside of this. These are the series of models that we went through. This is the model that we chose to create a new addition on the outside of this 1970s building, adding to this large building right here, trying to create a street front to Northeast 8th here, Northeast 2nd, which was a very difficult suburban site, setting back from the road. This is the existing building here, where we're creating an addition, blowing out the side of the corner, and then going up, dropping some columns here in the road here. We were very interested in using CLT from the very beginning. We wanted to use CLT as the structure for this new addition. Again, the contractor, the owner's rep was very negative about it. The risk was too much. So we ended up looking at this folded idea of a wall in the back of the church against the sanctuary, where the wall would become a series of 17 CLT panels running 8 feet by 40 feet high, and all of them could have their slightly different but same angularity that would reflect the light as it moved down through the site. They were supported by these steel columns, steel trusses in here. We made models after models to do light studies, to look at the sources of the indirect light. Built larger models, looking at the exterior. And the final built one is, which you saw here, coming off of Northeast 2nd, the entry into the existing building, and then through the fellowship hall into the sanctuary. Sanctuary closer up. When you emerge into the sanctuary, these 40-foot high panels then indirectly lit from the sides and the top and the sides again, are washing the light down in a very classical architectural sense. We looked a lot at Alto's Imatra Church. Beautiful, beautiful uses of light and the secondary skins that he does to reflect the qualities of the light from outside to inside, especially in those northern climes, which we share in Bellevue in Seattle. And the light washes down differently, obviously different times of the day and year, but it also washes down differently because each one of these panels, as you can see, has 4 different angles, and none of them are repeated. The angles at the bottom of this 4-inch panel, the angle at the top of the 4-inch angle, the angles of the side are both in plan and in section, carved in a different way through the CNC modeling. That took no extra time, other than the planning that it took in the beginning, because you cut a 90 degree on these CNC machines, or you cut a 37.6, it doesn't matter to that machine. It's the same long 40-foot cut. Space washes there. It's a 300-person sanctuary. And I'll just go through some of these experiences of light against the wood. So by this time it was 2016, and we had finished 4 CLT projects, including 2 little CLT school classrooms, which I won't show you here. We had taken 3 contractors through this process of working with CLT and 2 different structural engineers. Every contractor came in scared as shit about the whole thing, and by the time they got through that process, they was like these guys down at the bottom. They were standing in awe of what they had done to build these beautiful places, that they never thought it was going to be possible. They had never done this before, and they were amazed at themselves and their own power and at the ease of which the collaboration between architect, engineer, and contractor had happened. And we could tell that there was definitely something of a disruption happening. We didn't quite know, but it was so fun to work in this environment with the fabricator, the contractor, the engineer, and ourselves to create these spaces, that we knew there was something that was really exciting, that was beyond even the low carbon footprint. At this point, we created allies. We created a community. We'd been working with the University of Washington, with students there, teaching there, faculty there, doing life cycle analyses. And at some point, Washington, D.C. called me, the AIA National called me to be on this code committee to represent 90,000 architects to sit at the table to change the building codes to allow tall buildings. Reaching out to DC, having them reach out to me, working with our state legislators, working with a series of community people in Washington state, headed by Forterra organizations, was an incredible experience to build that community, to make mass timber happen at a broad national level. This part of the lecture is about the changes to regulatory design. Regulations have an incredible impact on what we build as architects. And those of you who are brave enough to wander into these waters of the codes, my hat goes out to you and my heart goes out to you. It was one of the most frightening things I've ever done. I am not a code person. Anybody who's ever worked with me would know I don't know that building code. I know bits of it. I know pieces of it. But I would never call myself a code expert. And when AIA called me and said, Susan, you're on this committee, I was totally nervous because I knew I don't know the code. I'm not that good in the code. They said, don't worry. What you know is mass timber. And we had to have a balanced committee. We had Sam Francis over there, who was really the reason this whole thing happened, We had Paul Shipp, he represented gypsum wallboard. We had Jonathan Hemble, he represented steel. We had another guy over here that represented concrete, and we had 6 people, 1/3 of the whole committee, representing the fire interests who were dead set against this happening. The idea of those guys sending their boys up into a high-rise and having a wooden high-rise and having a bad day brought tears to all of our eyes as they talked about that during this process. And our task was not small. Our task was to create 3 new building types to complement the type 4HT. 8 stories, 12 stories, and 18 stories. We had to invent new ways of building. How would you build safely with these high rises? How would you structure them? How would you integrate services? And how would you protect, God forbid, the mass timber from burning down? This is the type 4C building. You can see the gypsum topping slab, the openness of the ceilings and the walls, the columns, etc. But as we saw in the earlier one, type 4A gets completely built up. However, we had to deal with the fire department, and the fire department and these fire guys were really not fun. Going to New York City was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life, and talking to the fire department there about what we were going to do to build wooden high-rises and how great it was going to be. Yeah, that went over really well. So we had to also, in order to get this through, we invented a series of protocols to do 5 fire tests outside of DC in the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. We built this building, we designed the protocols to design this building 2 stories to represent real life fires in America as opposed to those European fires, and those guys don't know how to burn down buildings over there. You tell me, Sean McCain, how did that work? What's the real difference between European fires and American fires? And we tried to burn those buildings down 5 different times, let them run for 4 hours with no sprinklers. And we could not burn those buildings down. The impact of that was electric in the fire community, because no longer could they turn to data, claim data, and say these buildings are unsafe. The fires were contained within their compartments, they did not spread, and that opened up the green light to real code testifying in front of the committee action hearings for the ICC in 2018. This is in Columbus, Ohio. So we had 2 minutes to prepare our statements. We had another 2 minutes to rebut the statements and another 2 minutes to rebut the rebuttals. And there was 30 of us in a line, and we had to be organized like a lockstep. And those codes did pass the committee, despite the assembled ammunition of the concrete industry, who did not go over lightly, and nor did parts of the fire communities. The code community as a whole ended up voting for those codes, and in 2019 they became law to build these 3 different types of buildings: type 4C, type 4B, and type 4A. I then I needed to come back to test the LCA analyses. I've been working with Kate Simonen, who you may know from the Carbon Leadership Forum at the University of Washington. She's an incredible life cycle scientist, working with University of Washington at Indranil Ganguly, Maureen Putnam, incredible people who were looking at mass timber, and we ended up partnering with the Nature Conservancy to test and verify. Because we were using so much new data and new life cycle analyses data, I'm not a life cycle scientist, but we ended up collaborating with them to make sure that we were actually on the right path. We ended up doing more fire tests in Sweden. In addition to the first 5, we did another 5 last fall. Again, tried to burn that building down 5 times, never got to it. And then created more code regulations to allow all of this ceiling to be open, even at the 12-story side buildings. And it brought us to a very great, lovely place in our practice just a year ago, where we were able to focus and refocus our attention on our practice and what we could do to build out of this mass timber, out of this industry that we created. The first little notion that we did was to take that little 3,000 square foot site in the Central District across from Thurgood Marshall Elementary School and build something out of mass timber this time. We looked at some townhouses, we looked at some modular units, and we're now pulling a permit here for a very small 5-unit building that would be a modular building, 4 different units, 2-story units up on top, a large single-family, a three-story, three-bedroom unit down below. The design of this building is a very flat concrete element. It's cantilevered over the top with two-story units and a back circulation area with a shaft going up and down. We're looking at prefabricated modular elements as opposed to prefabricated volumetric elements. And these will slip into the shafts, kitchens, and baths, and the shafts going vertically down the soffit into the street. A little bit of the layouts of the first and second and third floor, and of course the CLT. This time using 60-foot long panels. This is a very simple type 5B building, and using prefabricated elements for the exterior. Looking at a little project here, the multiple myriad of designs in here. When you're developing something yourself, you have a lot more time to begin to have fun with different ideas. And the building is going through building permit right now. We hope to start construction in 2023. The last project I'm going to talk about, though, is our Capitol Hill housing project, which is arguably one of the most significant projects for our firm, no doubt, but also one of them in Washington, one of the most significant ones in Washington. It'll be the tallest mass timber building in the state, and one of, if not the first, type 4C building to be built. It's also on a parking lot. We love these waste sites, these infill sites in our cities. It's adjacent to this 1907 historic home designed built by the Vaughan family, and it's owned currently now by Capitol Hill Housing, Community Roots Housing, who is our client, and it serves an affordable housing market of 30% affordable income. And our project will be serving workforce housing, which is designed between 60 and 120% of medium income, which in Seattle is surprisingly high and includes a lot of architects. The little diagram for this site, this is the existing LNV, and this is the parking lot. This is Madison Street slicing through the city. Our house is on the other side of it. This is Union Street. And the existing building here, we're creating a little courtyard here to try to get these two populations to mix and to come together. There's a fair amount of defensiveness and concern about the two populations mixing brought on by the residents themselves. There are deep and ingrained equity issues on this site that are felt very keenly by the residents. And so while our project is owned by the same client that owns this building, there is a series of very careful interventions that we're trying to make to bring these populations together in a way that feels secure and safe and aware for everybody. This site is permeable, both off Union and off 14th side. It's a simple L-shaped building with small units averaging 400 square feet above. We have a series of stoops going out to Union Street and a long walkway off of Union Street, looking at some ground level units. Of course, the big lobby and going up into the project. The building also adds scale to the city. Tremendous scale, up to 8 stories, opposed to the 3-story surroundings. We have a couple of 5/1 buildings and one little 6-story building right here, but it brings it up to that Middle European contour of about 22 meters and 8 stories, and it's a type 4C building. It's a very simple building, repetitive units, using the same CLT layout per floor, a little bit different, taking a single window and just using it as a single element that's repeated in different ways as you move up and down the building, but quite a simple and humble building. Setting on a podium of mass timber this time, but clad in nicheha, which is a fiber cement product to look like wood, with a little bit of a retail space here and a series of defensible space planters for these small stoops in the front, and then the alley entry off this side with the main entry off the back. The alley entry there. Some shots of the courtyard as you move in. And the interior space of one of the smallest units of all, a 321 square foot unit, a studio, the bathroom, small shower, small kitchen, bed, ideally Murphy bed, with a couple of windows, all framed in mass timber ceilings, columns, and beams looking out to the city of Seattle beyond, enveloped in natural wood, a small gift to these humble units, to the inhabitants of them. The story of where the wood comes from is reflected in this mural on the exterior. All of the wood can be regrown in the United States in 37 minutes. This kind of new growth that happens in May for our Douglas fir trees is a stunning and beautiful addition to our forests around the second week of May. And that light green is being reflected both on the paint color but also in the iridescence, in the phosphorescence at night. And the interior wood analyses is brilliant. We have no parking on this site. We have a little bit of concrete down here. This is all of the concrete in the building, the foundation and the walls, foundation and the grade beams, columns and beams, floor slabs of the CLT, and the massed plywood panel stairs going up. The wood greatly exceeds the amount of concrete in addition to the gypsum topping on the floor slabs. And one of the most exciting things in our practice right now is this building is going to be starting construction in a month. We've been permitted by the City of Seattle. We have been permitted as of right, so all of the Type 4C codes are now active and able to be used by this product. We see this project as a replicable project where we can take this Revit model, which is straight off of my network on this computer, accessible by my computer. This is not an architect's drawing. This is an exploded axon of all of the live systems in the site, from the concrete at the bottom, all the fire life safety sprinklers, mechanical, plumbing, electrical conduit, the steel core, brace frames, reinforced frames, and then the glulam columns and beams and CLT slabs. This is a live Revit model which can be replicated. The simplicity of the plan, the simplicity of the structural elements makes this possible to replicate in multiple different ways. And one of the next things we're going to be doing as a firm is taking this as a design idea and replicating it, because the system on the exterior, this can go to market rate housing, this can go to high-end housing, this can go to even office, although it's difficult with the floor slabs sizes. And the design on the exterior can be of any nature. And we'll be replicating this over the next few months to begin to demonstrate the disruptive power of this building that you've never seen before, not even in Europe really. This is an 8-story building. This is the superstructure of this project with the NPP stairs, wood stairs going through on this very slim little concrete foundation and grade beams. And the power of CLT has been disruptive, both for the AE and CN industry, but also for the forests. And it brings us back to the nature of why we are doing this as architects, and why we are building as architects, and why the challenges before us as a profession to deal with both levels of ecologies, from our built ecologies and our urban ecologies to the ecologies of our forest and the nature around us. Thank you very much.
Susan, I don't know that we could do questions online, but since you're the guinea pig for getting all this stuff together.
I can talk to them,
right?
yeah.
But why don't we start with questions in the room? Yeah, that would be a really ideal thing to do. Thank you very much. That was a terrific lecture. Let's start with questions.
I have a question.
Hi, Daniel.
Hi. Hey, fantastic. Thank you for your talk. And I think it's amazing research. Really a huge promise for real disruptive change. Did I remember it right that you said it takes 37 minutes of forest growth to, in a way, in the US and America, in a way to regrow your building?
Yes, that's what I said.
Because I shortly did the math, how many units it would have. Because I think we were last year 1.5 million units building in the US, or homes.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think I put now 100 units for that, what you said, at 37. I come to 1.7 million. It looks like that already the construction industry has a taste or use of material which would exceed already the forestry existing in the United States. So there comes in the idea with the waste wood, which is I think you could completely recycle or recycle the whole thing. So could you explain more about how actually now in the CLT we could integrate actually like really recycling like existing buildings and so on.
Yeah.
Or like, yeah.
So many different levels to your question, Daniel. First of all, there's a predilection to think that mass timber is the entire building. The reason I show this is because it's obviously only one part of the building. There's a massive amounts of building that are around it, that are on top of it, that are not wood, not to mention the concrete foundation, which always has to be concrete because it's below grade. It's very tempting to think all of our buildings, you just take the square footage of our buildings, and that's the wood that we need. The wood in this building is a fraction, I don't have the numbers for you, Daniel, but it's a fraction of the square footage of the buildings that we are looking at. And it's a common misconception, and you're a data guy, so I'm not going to doubt your math, but I guess I am calling it into question to think about that when you are building with these massive pieces of wood. But your question was also about how to reuse the wood. And that is, I think, an area that we as an industry in the US and as academics could really contribute to greatly. The use of second use of design for disassembly. There's been a lot of work that's been done on that by a series of grants that have been happening by the USDA, but actually there's just a tremendous amount of thought that could be done into it. The differences between this building, though, and what you normally think of as a light wood frame building with 2x4s and 2x6s that they build all the houses that we were talking about the other day. These buildings are mass timber pieces, which are big. So you destroy this building, hopefully in 100, no less than 100, a couple hundred years, you're going to have some very major pieces of wood which have all been protected by weather barriers and from climate issues. And so they're all well detailed by those big long 857 screws that you can now screw out. You don't even need to hammer them out because they're not nails, they're screws. And so if you were pulling these pieces out and you were stacking them like the way we would stack big, huge, lovely 18 by 18 inch pieces of beams and columns, that challenge of being able to use these pieces gets completely different. You know, most of my career, I've watched my architectural peers pull out these big 18 by 18 pieces of wood and reuse them in beautiful restaurants and retail spaces, and of course we all want to use them. But they're a limited supply chain because those forests that those trees were brought from are dead. We're not going to cut them anymore, and they've already been cut and we're finished with using them. So to use a 21st century product that can be then revamped out of small waste wood, which was also your point, is a really valuable thing to begin. Now, I don't have the math on this, but I do have a demand paper, which was back here, that was just published in December of 2021, a month ago. And there was these three papers that I was an author on regarding the life cycle analyses of them. These are about life cycle analyses for concrete versus the mass timber buildings. And I'm happy to send you these, Daniel. But in that same journal that was published, it was a special issue on mass timber of sustainability. In that same academic peer-reviewed journal, there were two articles that were talking about the global demand for mass timber. Should it take off in the way that we all think it might? And both of them said, first of all, the architects are building such a small amount of the total building area out there. We're substituting a relatively small amount of buildings regardless of that. But both of them were very clear that there would be a very insignificant impact on our forests if the forests were managed carefully and sustainably, which they absolutely have to make this all work. The next elements of if it were to take off at a humongous level, where 3 out of 4 buildings in the large buildings across the globe were being made out of mass timber, there would be an impact on the forests that would be much more critical. But these, the projections over the next 50 years at least are very, very kind to the forests in that 37 minutes. The site for that, the citation for the 37 minutes is from woodworks.org, and I'll send you that as well. Laura. Hey, hi.
I have a question about kind of what we're seeing in Austin and what I'm seeing in practice of it when I put forth a mass timber building. Is we often end up at a place that's more like your house. It's more of a combination structure. So when I'm looking at a project like that, do you have advice or input as to kind of the most advantageous ways to use the mass timber in conjunction with other structural materials that
Yeah, that's a great question, Laura. I mean, I think really using the materials for what they're meant to be used for in the most beautiful ways is absolutely a key thing. If you can substitute it, for instance, on this screen, if you can substitute and save up to like 50% of the carbon that you would be doing if you were building this building in concrete, then that seems like a great use for this product as well. Similarly, if you're doing something, a smaller house, you can do that out of wood, out of 2x4s and 2x6s, which are lower carbon materials as well. There's just fewer of them, and you use more insulation and more gypsum wallboard to work with that. The carbon footprint is really not that much better to whether it's a 2x4 or 2x6 house versus a mass timber house. I sort of like to think of my house as being a little bit extravagant because we're really not using that material for its best use at the highest and best value of scale. And this is where we're going to make the impact on scale, on our carbon footprint as an industry, is right here, which is why I spent 2.5 years working pro bono to change those codes. I think the idea of using steel as a prefabricated element itself, as a hybrid structure, the way I saw at your East 6 project, the Thought Barn project down there, is a great example. And it's using steel where it needs to be used and mass timber where it can be seen and enjoyed, and it's a beautiful product. Yes?
There's a question on the YouTube channel from Arthur Longoria. How applicable do you think mass timber / CLT construction is to disrupting the mass attached single-family housing in the U.S.? And what would you consider the biggest challenges in tracking this technology?
Yeah, well, we're working on 3 single-family houses right now, and because again, the reality of the built project is really compelling, and it's a wonderful tool to build with because of some of the beautiful spatial qualities and the light qualities that you can get, and the materiality and the biophilic effect on its inhabitants. It's been a fabulous project. All of these projects have, but they are, as I said before, I do think that they are a bit overused as a material, and using it as a smaller level of material might be as a more focused area is probably a good plan. I don't see the impact except on a possible modular way to begin to replicate those projects in a single family way. 2 of the projects we were working on were intended to be modular, where they were modularly planned, not modularly volumetrically brought in. But this impact is rolling out on it's impacted the construction industry because obviously the power of the modular and the prefabrication is extremely compelling. And if we can get it right, we all saw Katerra in our state of Washington go up and go down in this influx of huge amounts of global capital, and they were trying to create the perfect 3-story, 4-story walk-up single-family house, and also mass timber multifamily areas. But that multifamily project really wasn't as a modular project. I think one of the greatest challenges we have is not designing it first, but design it and implementing it the 2nd and 3rd and 4th and 5th time, where you get those powers of scale. And I would really be, I really want to be very encouraging to the modular prefabricated world. We have had 4 or 5 experiences where we need to be more aggressive about keeping the bespoke site and programmatic constraints extremely disciplined in order to bring the power of scale at modular to fruition in the end. So I'm very excited about smaller scale single family developments for modular work, and I would love to talk to your friend who's on the YouTube video about it further. We've had a lot of really fun projects. I didn't show 2 of these 2 here, but they are currently on hold because of the challenge of replication on the site constraints. The mass timber is a piece of cake. Anyway, thank you very much for everybody's time, and it was great to be here, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.